A dangerous tropical cyclone is expected to form tonight or tomorrow over Darwin and drop an incredible amount of rain in the Northern Territory and Queensland. So a tropical cyclone or a tropical low is now expected to develop over the Northern Territory near Darwin tonight or tomorrow night or into early next week, and it's expected to wrap itself up into a big rain-making mess, that's for sure. It's not expected to be a strong cyclone in terms of winds, but it's a dangerous one in terms of how much rainfall it's expected to dump across the Northern Territory and Queensland. All of that plus more in your latest weather update from Force 13 AU, January 13th, 2024. If you're brand new here, please do consider subscribing and also leave a like on the video while you're at it. But let's take a look at the national picture right now before we break down the forecast in greater detail. You can see rain and storms up in the Northern Territory associated with that developing tropical low. That turns to rain on the Cape York Peninsula over Cairns, and then also rain extending down the southeast Queensland coastline, extending down into New South Wales. Storms inland and very hot conditions as well inland across Western Australia and into South Australia and southern parts of the Northern Territory. So it's a busy picture across the nation today, with a lot of the nation expecting some pretty extreme weather, whether that's heat or heavy rainfall, damaging winds, whatnot, from severe thunderstorms. There's a lot of stuff going on across the nation, and we're going to take a look at those cyclone chances right now, which they have been dropped, but don't be fooled, they don't tell the full picture. So we're expecting maybe one tropical low or tropical cyclone to form out of this, but regardless, it's going to drop an incredible amount of rainfall across northern Australia. So a 20% chance of this storm forming into a tropical cyclone offshore from Darwin. Now that's not the concerning part. The concerning part is the fact that if it gets itself over the Gulf of Carpentaria, there'll be absolutely nothing in this way of this cyclone getting up towards category 2 or 3 status. However, it looks like most forecast models are taking it inland, paralleling the Queensland Northern Territory coastline on the Gulf of Carpentaria, which is some good news, which I'll explain later. So the Access G3 rainfall forecast for the next 10 days, you can see, as indicated by those blacks and reds, very heavy rainfall across the Kimberley of Western Australia and also across the Northern Territory, and that persists into Wednesday or Thursday. Some locations expecting up to 1,000 millimeters of rain from these tropical lows. And that will turn into heavy showers in the southern parts of the state associated with that trough that's expected to move through, that low pressure system that's expected to move through Tasmania and Victoria, and that will bring some very severe thunderstorms across Victoria and New South Wales next Thursday and Friday. So be monitoring that very closely as well. You can see as this rain system moves inland into Central Australia, it'll also dump an incredible amount of rainfall across South Australia and Queensland. We could be seeing some locations pick up in excess of 100 millimeters, which for some places is a year's worth of rainfall. Now for temperature, you can see hot conditions across our states, or our nation's south and our nation's west, and those will extend into hot conditions into the red centre and across South Australia and the Northern Territory, with some places expecting daytime maxima above 45 degrees Celsius over the next 10 days. Once again, it's not unseasonal weather, but it is certainly some very hot conditions, so make sure you're staying it safe and playing it smart with the hot weather and not doing any vigorous outside activities in the Australian summer, because it is some brutal heat, that's for sure. In fact, next Saturday and Sunday up to 48 degrees Celsius in some parts of the WA goldfields, extending down towards Eucla and then into South Australia, and those extreme temperatures could move into places like Ceduna or Streaky Bay next weekend and into early next week. Now we're looking at the tropics right now and seeing what winds we're expecting associated with these tropical cyclones from the Access G3 model. Well, we're not expecting a tropical cyclone to develop until about Tuesday or Wednesday in terms of winds, but this storm will likely move into the Gulf of Carpentaria and likely intensified to a tropical cyclone there, but that's after one forms in the open Indian Ocean, and that will likely pick up the next name on the Australian naming list, which is Cyclone Kirrily, before that tropical low 03U moves into the Gulf of Carpentaria, and if it gets named there, it will likely pick up the name of Lincoln. So be listening out quite closely for those two names, because they are possible in the next 10 days, maybe even a third one in the Gulf of in the Coral Sea, so we'll be watching that one quite closely. Here's a look at the convective activity that's happening across Australia's north right now. You can see a lot of thunderstorm activity centered around Darwin. They've had a tremendous amount of rainfall, up to 100 millimeters for the past 24 hours. Well, not tremendous, it's seasonal rainfall, but still quite a lot of rainfall, and it's not going to stop. In fact, it's only going to intensify over the coming few days, which I'm going to tell you right now in the forecast models section of this video. Got a lot to get through in this part of the video for the next 10 minutes. Make sure you're sticking around to the end to get your detailed forecast. We're going to be taking a look at the tropical cyclone threat and the rainfall threat for the Northern Territory and Queensland first. We're going to be taking a look at other tropical cyclones around Australia. We've got 2 more on the cards, and then we're going to be taking a look at the thunderstorm situation across Queensland, New South Wales, as I zoom into Antarctica apparently, and across into Victoria and Tasmania. A lot to get through, so stick around to the end. Okay, so starting things off, taking a look at the current picture right now, you can see quite a lot of thunderstorm activity across Northern Australia and the Northern Territory. You can see with the wind observations, there's already a defined sort of very broad low pressure system starting to rotate up here, at least in the lower levels, which also means, and just looking at this convective pattern that we've been seeing, is that there's also something starting to develop in the mid levels. And if I just download this loop real quick here, you can see that this low pressure area is situated south of Katherine or Tyndall, and it's moving more, I would say, very slowly towards the west. Actually, you can see a lot of thunderstorm activity blowing into Western Australia and also around the Northern Territory. There's just a lot of storm activity up here associated with this rainfall event, and it's starting to get quite windy up across the northern parts of the state as well. On some of the islands, the Channel Islands, it's definitely starting to get a little bit blustery up there as a result of this rotating weather pattern from this tropical cyclone or this tropical low. Now, it's not actually expected to become a tropical cyclone, at least right now, before it impacts Darwin, so it's unlikely to see it become a tropical cyclone as it moves across here this week, or actually if we start it back on Sunday evening when it is now. It just moves around, hovers around a little bit, but it doesn't look like it gets over the water for long enough to become a tropical cyclone. And once again, the forecast is quite uncertain. What we're looking at for a cyclone is when it moves over the Gulf of Carpentaria. That's when it's got the highest chance of becoming a tropical cyclone, but we're also monitoring another tropical low which could become a cyclone in the Coral Sea, which I will get to a little bit later. And then we're going to also take a look at some thunderstorms happening across New South Wales and Queensland. But for now, we'll just keep an eye on 03U because it is expected to become a big rain threat, that's for sure. And we're going to get to that right now. You can see as it moves across the Northern Territory and into Queensland, which happens next Friday or so. If we switch over to the Access G3 model, actually, it gives a better idea of where this storm's going to be tracking, which I will get to a little bit later. And then we're going to also take a look at some thunderstorms happening across New South Wales and Queensland. But for now, we'll just keep an eye on 03U because it is expected to become a big rain threat, that's for sure. And we're going to get to that right now. You can see as it moves across the Northern Territory and into Queensland, which happens next Friday or so. If we switch over to the Access G3 model, actually, it gives a better idea of where this storm's going to be tracking. It tracks really close to the Queensland coastline across the Gulf of Carpentaria, and it brings these really strong winds around on the northern side of the system. So it's basically a cyclone at this point, but I don't think it's going to qualify for cyclone status because of the gale rule. But I mean, look at this, 60 knot wind gusts. This is a strong system as it's moving inland through here. So it is certainly a threat, and it's a worrying threat at that. But what's really got my eye is the amount of rainfall that this cyclone is expected to bring through. You can see as we keep track of the time down the bottom, next Friday and into Saturday, it's moving towards Gregory and Burketown in the Queensland, or the extreme western Queensland state. And you can see a lot of rainfall falling up to 50 millimetres every hour for some places in some of the Indigenous communities on the southern Cape York Peninsula and around Mornington Island. So very, very wet conditions expected to begin Friday morning, and they will last until right through the weekend and into early next week. And we'll be seeing rainfall accumulation around Burketown approach 1,500 millimetres in one or two places, and then further inland, you're looking at places around Mount Isa picking up over 500 millimetres. And in fact, one or two spots possible with up to 1,000 millimetres under the right banding features. It's a plausible forecast, and these river catchments are going to flood even with 100 millimetres of rain, which is expected for so many locations in central Queensland and even into the Northern Territory and South Australia. You're looking at some very serious flooding expected to develop across Queensland as a result of this tropical cyclone moving through. And this flooding situation will unfold over next weekend and into early next week, where up to a year or even 2 years worth of rainfall will fall in some locations, which will spark major riverine flooding in a lot of these river catchments. And I can't stress that enough, how important it is to stay up to date with the Bureau of Meteorology and us to be on top of all of those warnings that will be inevitably coming out as a result of this cyclone and the flooding that it's expected to cause. Now, what I also would like to note is in already saturated catchments around Cairns and Port Douglas, that sort of area, impacted by Cyclone Jasper, is there's a lot of rainfall expected there next weekend as well. I mean, they're just going to get this sort of onshore flow Sunday and Monday next week, and it's just going to be torrential rainfall. I mean, you're looking at probably another 200 to 300 millimetres over there as a result of this cyclone's passage or tropical low's passage, depending on how strong it is, and that'll extend down towards Townsville as well. So places that missed out on Cyclone Jasper will certainly receive rainfall from this system right now, and places that are already saturated from Cyclone Jasper will also be likely receiving landfall from this situation. So it is a very widespread rainfall situation that we're looking at unfolding across the northern parts of the Northern Territory, into Queensland and the Cape York Peninsula, and even into parts of South Australia as well, around the South Australia-Queensland border. Moomba, Birdsville, these sort of areas could be receiving significant amounts of rainfall from this cyclone or from this tropical low towards the end of next weekend and into very early next week, as this tropical low, or the remnants of this kind of messy thunderstorm system, then move into South Australia and then probably into New South Wales later next week and dissipate there. So it will be tracking for quite a while over the desert, dropping a lot of rainfall, causing a significant amount of flooding, and it's a worrying forecast that we have coming up, that's for sure. Now we're going to take a look at the tropical low in the Coral Sea and then a tropical cyclone over on the Indian Ocean waters, but you can see something towards the end of the 10-day forecast period, or actually mid-next week, could be spinning itself up around the Solomon Islands or south of the Solomon Sea. It's a very weak sort of spin-up that we're looking at here, a low chance of formation. I believe the Bureau of Meteorology has it at 20% chance. There's greater model support on some other forecast models. The ECMWF is one in particular. It flies off the Cape York Peninsula and then sort of wraps itself up, I guess, in the Coral Sea before moving towards New Caledonia, or actually hovering around in the Coral Sea by around day 10, but its future is very uncertain. The GFS is the most aggressive with this tropical low, spinning it up into a tropical cyclone actually Wednesday and into Thursday. But again, the GFS has been an interesting model to pick for the Australian region so far this year. It's flung up some pretty crazy scenarios, especially with Cyclone Jasper and its Brisbane landfall at one point. So I wouldn't be betting my bottom dollar on this scenario actually materialising, but it's an interesting take from the GFS hovering a system around the Coral Sea. Now, this morning it did produce Cyclone Jasper across the Kimberley region, and it's still doing that actually. So it spins up another cyclone here and refuses to put Jasper through the Northern Territory in Queensland. So if this becomes consistent and other models pick up on it, then I'm going to be more inclined to go back to the original forecast for the next tropical cyclone, likely Kirrily or Lincoln up here, that will swing around and parallel the WA coastline, because that was the initial forecast for this tropical low, to move around the West Australian coastline. But now we've got it moving through central Northern Territory and central Queensland down towards South Australia. So that's a pretty interesting take from the GFS model, and I haven't seen this from any other forecast models, but you bet I'll be giving you the latest if I do see it on other forecast models, because that's when we're looking at greater certainty. Now, just before we take a look at the thunderstorm situation, you can also see another tropical cyclone spinning itself up in the southwest Indian Ocean. I believe the Access G3 model has this getting towards Category 3 severe tropical cyclone status as it moves over the Cocos Islands, maybe very briefly up to Category 3 status. Actually, looking at those winds, probably not. It remains a Category 1 or 2, but it could be still a fairly interesting system to track, and it just hovers around here and will likely dump quite a lot of rainfall actually over the Cocos Islands in the next 10 days, which is interesting considering we don't normally see cyclones, like mature cyclones, stall around this part of the world. They normally have places to be. They either swing into the southwest Indian Ocean or they beeline it for Western Australia. In this case, this storm does absolutely nothing and just hovers around here, which is good because it should suck up all of the energy that's available for cyclones over in the Indian Ocean and prevent big ones from actually beelining it towards Western Australia and becoming a serious, severe cyclone threat. Now, as promised, we're going to take a look at this thunderstorm situation materialising for Victoria and New South Wales, because this is actually quite an interesting forecast. It's quite an uncertain one, as you normally see with thunderstorms about 3 to 4 days out. We'll know more next Monday and Tuesday, but you can see a low pressure system starts to form over New South Wales Tuesday morning into Tuesday afternoon, and that enhances thunderstorm activity across Victoria and New South Wales. And you can see quite a substantial amount of isolated pulse thunderstorms are expected Tuesday and then into Wednesday as well. We're expecting a widespread thunderstorm event to unfold. Severe thunderstorms expected throughout New South Wales, Victoria Victoria and southern Queensland associated with Cyclone Jasper up here. So, I mean, this would be a satellite picture, that's for sure. Just a cyclone developing over the Northern Territory and thunderstorm after thunderstorm after thunderstorm across Queensland and New South Wales. So that's going to be interesting to see. But it's driven by this low pressure system and this sort of warm front by the looks of things. Looking at this forecast, moving a lot of moisture through Victoria and New South Wales and then down towards Tasmania, and they could be picking up a substantial amount of rainfall here. The eastern coast of Tasmania might just get more than 100 to 150 millimetres from this situation around St Helens or Swansea, Bicheno, that sort of area. We could be seeing a substantial amount of rainfall through there, and also into Victoria and New South Wales. In places already flooding, you could be looking at a further 50 to 100 millimetres in one or two locations from the right thunderstorm. Around Canberra as well, up to 100 millimetres there. So a serious situation that we need to be watching closely. We can't get distracted by our tropics because this thunderstorm situation is interesting, and it's something that could be a little bit concerning and threatening towards our southern states as well. Thankfully, it seems to give Sydney and the major population centres a bit of a miss, which is good, considering we don't want big thunderstorms going for our major population centres. But inland, it's going to be a different story with a lot of lightning, a lot of thunderstorm activity, and some of these thunderstorms could be very severe indeed, driven by the energy that this cyclone up here will force down into New South Wales and Queensland. So that's interesting and something that we will be watching very closely on the Force 13 AU channel. So make sure you are subscribed, because we will be bringing you the latest on all of the weather happening nationwide. We're not going to be neglecting any places, that's for sure. And yeah, I'll just finish this off with looking at the ECMWF's long-term forecast for the tropical low here. Both the Access G3 and the ECMWF have this moving inland into Australia's red centre, dumping a lot of rainfall across Australia's centre in the form of intense thunderstorms and just rain bands that will last for days in some locations. And you're looking at rainfall accumulation approaching 500 millimetres in some locations, and that's a tremendous amount of rainfall. That's a year's to 2 years worth of rainfall in some locations here. So a lot of rainfall expected. Now, this means that I'm very confident in seeing this cyclone track through the Northern Territory and then turning inland at some point across the Gulf of Carpentaria coastline. The sooner it does it, the more heavily impacted the Northern Territory will be, and the later it does it, the more heavily impacted Queensland, South Australia and Victoria will be. I'm more inclined to follow the Access G3 model at this time, considering it's Australia's own forecast model. It doesn't prioritise any other part of the world, just Australia. So I'd be more inclined to look at that forecast right now. However, we will take into account the fact that this storm is very likely to head inland. And I reckon the GFS's forecast is maybe a little bit wacky at this time, having the cyclone stall over the Northern Territory and then swing back out over the West Australian waters. So that's a little bit wacky in my opinion. But if it does manage to do that, there's not going to be too much stopping this storm apart from land interaction. If it gets itself over the open waters, you're looking at sea surface temperatures approaching 30 degrees Celsius in a lot of places along the WA coastline. So tremendous sea surface temperatures, and that will explosively intensify a tropical cyclone. And if it heads for the WA coastline after spending a couple of days out to sea in a low wind shear environment with a lot of instability, you're looking at a catastrophic event unfolding for places extending between Exmouth and Broome. So we'll be watching that forecast closely, because if that does materialise, then we've got a lot more on our hands and we're playing a completely different ball game than just a bunch of rain clouds moving into Queensland and down into South Australia, which will only cause a flooding situation at its absolute worst. So we're hoping for the best, but definitely keep in mind that you should be preparing for the worst at this point. If you do have a flood plan, make sure you're enacting it over the next couple of days, especially as we get a greater idea of what the forecast is going to be. But anyway, that's all that I have time for. Thank you so much for watching to this point, and if you did enjoy, please do consider leaving a like on the video, and if you really like this stuff and you want to see more, please do consider subscribing. I'm sorry about how late this video is. I've had work and I've had software problems, so I do apologise, but it is out now, and I thank you so much for watching and having your patience with me. That's all from me, and I'll catch you all in the next storm.
Thank you for watching our content this update. If you enjoyed it, be sure to subscribe to get more updates covering all things weather and geophysics impacting Australia and the Oceania region. Subscribe to our other channels for more content from across the network, and be sure to check out our website where you can find free access to floater and radar imagery and articles on everything weather and much more. If you wish to support us directly, you can purchase some of our merchandise. We have a wide variety of clothing and homeware, or you could become an Ultimate Fan, which is the best way to directly support us, granting you some sweet perks and offers, including features in our custom storm animations, live streams, and much more.